Have you ever asked yourself, who am I? And no, not me, Victor, the guy telling you this, but who are you? You're asking this about yourself, you get it? Well, if you did actually ask yourself this, then what did you come up with? Who are you? What defines you? What makes you yourself? Well, a 6-year-old might say that he's his name. And yes, that's a great tool for understanding someone's identity. He might also say that he likes dinosaurs or toy cars or plushies, and this is what sets him apart from other kids. You at a more advanced age might say that you like cars or hockey, and this is what sets you apart from other people. And you still have the same name, which still is a great tool for understanding an identity. Obviously, things are not that simple, or else this video would be over. The point that I'm trying to make here is that your identity is always changing, yet still staying the same. Your interests, your thoughts, and even the cells in your body are always changing, but yet you're still the same person. Well, then we might ask ourselves, what even is identity? How does it stay the same throughout all the changes in our life and our personality? Does it even stay the same? Well, if you've asked yourself this, then you are not alone. Many people over history have asked themselves the same thing. Very many people. Today we shall look at some opinions on the concept of identity. We shall see how they evolve and how they contradict each other. And then we will understand why they ultimately suck. In this inquiry, we shall make use of a great book which a friend of mine found at the local library. It's called 3 Metaphysical Histories for Insomniacs, and it's a hidden treasure written by a guy named Laurentius Staico. He is a philosophy professor for the University of Bucharest. I don't have a physical copy because it's a very rare book. It doesn't have an English translation yet. What we're talking about today makes up only a third of the book. The other 2 parts of the book talk about why does something exist instead of nothing, and what is truly real. If you like this video and would be interested in hearing about those topics as well, then let me know down in the comments and I shall be making a video for them. But thus being said, let's get right into it. Let's see, who am I? Part 1. Why should we care? Even after this beautiful introduction, some of y'all might still ask yourselves, why should I care? Philosophy is for nerds and for bookworms which never had a real job. And while yes, those are factual statements, philosophy as a whole has 2 major strong points. It makes you look smart and it's entertaining. So why should we care? Because it's fun. Now that we started to care about philosophy, we can think about what makes the problem of identity so interesting. Well, the idea of an identity has and will always be fundamental for every aspect of our lives. Without identity, there's no individuality. And without individuality, well, nothing really works. Can you imagine a world where everyone is exactly the same? No. Of course not. You can't do it because without identity, there's no movement and no multiplicity. When 2 people move independently from one another, they get separate identities. And that's why you can't imagine a world where everyone is the same. A world like that would have no movement and no plurality. And this just sounds unnatural. Well, except for Parmenides, but he's the weird kid. And we'll get into that later. Secondly, if identity wouldn't exist, contracts wouldn't exist, because the person who signed them wouldn't be the same person tomorrow, and therefore couldn't be held accountable for signing the contract in the first place. Love would also be a massive mistake, because the person you fell in love with would be a completely different person every second. And fundamental emotion of the human experience, like guilt or pride, would be completely cancelled, for you wouldn't be the guy who did a thing of which you might feel ashamed or proud of. Without identity, the whole human world would be in shambles. Therefore, thinking about identity could answer some fundamental questions about what being human means. Why do we change opinions, beliefs, and acts? How much does one's thinking evolve over time? How much can we augment our bodies with technology and still be the same people? If I had a bionic arm, I could still say that that's me. But what if my consciousness gets uploaded into a supercomputer? Is that still me? Or on the other side of the spectrum, what if I get very severe amnesia, which makes me forget my name, my memories, and the people I love? Is it still me? Well, the short answer is that we don't really know this. What we do know is that identity exists in everyone in one way or another. We know this because of a sort of common sense. But we know this formally because people have been thinking about this for the last 2000 years. Before identity was invented, there was Parmenides. He hated movement and multiplicity and said that they didn't exist. Then a guy named Zeno, Parmenides' disciple, came up with 44 paradoxes which said that plurality and movement truly do not exist. That's where we get the Achilles and the turtle thing from, by the way. But if those things don't exist, then what does? Well, for Parmenides, there's only one, the so-called Parmenidean sphere. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it's just enough for our cause today. Of course, someone had to tell Parmenides and Zeno that they're stupid. Paradoxical as it is, we can still move, and we can see this clearly enough. That's where Plato comes in, with his theory of the forms. You know it, with the cave and all that. He said that there's a perfect world out there without multiplicity or movement. And the things in our world try to copy the things in the world of forms. Unsuccessfully, of course, and that's why we have plurality and movement, because the world sucks basically. But this means that in our world, if multiplicity exists, the concept of identity must necessarily come from that, or else you couldn't differentiate between those multiplicities. It is here that Plato introduces the concept of a soul. It's something which every living being has, and for which you must care by doing philosophy, because true philosophy is the closest you can get to the world of forms in this life. Plato wrote at length about the soul, but he didn't really say how identity comes about. What differentiates a soul from another is just that they come from the world of forms and they want to go back, but that's it. Then Aristotle came in, and in a very aptly named book called On the Soul, said that the soul is an universal principle which differentiates itself from other souls through images. So basically, through whatever you do in life. Therefore, everyone has different identities because they do different things. But the intellect as a whole, that's common to all people. Yeah, he just dropped this, by the way, and never explained it, which led to a lot of philosophical fighting in the Middle Ages, but that's a story for another video. The existence of identity then becomes definitive through the works of St. Augustine. In his Confessions, one of his most famous books, he tells the story of his life, believing that his individuality could be useful to us and to our connection and understanding of God. Okay, so now that we are sure that identity exists, we could start and try to figure out what it actually is. Let's hear some opinions. Part 2. The soul. Okay, so the oldest and simplest theory of identity is the doctrine of the soul. Plato believed that the soul is immaterial, and as such it can't ever disappear. He believed that after our death, the soul just goes to the world of forms, where it gets to know reality itself. This view, which was further adapted as we all know, is a very popular and very pleasant one, because it gives us reassurance. Even if you die, you're still fine because it's only your body that dies. You, the real you, are okay. Based on the concept of this soul, we can affirm that identity exists and that it's tightly correlated to the concept of a person, for it never changes and never dies. Okay, so the soul exists. It has some fundamental traits which guarantee your identity with yourself for the rest of your life. Well, everything's settled. We found it. It's this simple. If you made it this far and decided to stop here, that's called a simple view. It says that identity exists, but we cannot know or understand it. I am content in my lack of understanding, but I know enough in order to form a belief structure and to live a happy life based on that. To be clear, I don't have a derogatory attitude towards the people who believe this, and I encourage you to do the same. There aren't lots of people who will give up their existential stability and belief system just because it isn't entirely rational. To do that would imply going through a massive change in your internal structure, which none of us really want to do. For ultimately, there isn't any point in it other than knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So, the next time when you talk to someone about their soul and they aren't willing to listen to your rationality, just let them have it. Let them be happy with their beliefs. If that is what allows them to live through this shitty life, let them believe, but only as long as they don't hurt anybody with those beliefs. Whenever they encroach on anybody's freedoms based on these beliefs, then yes, you can be as harsh as you want, and I encourage you to be. But let's get back into it. If you're not happy with this theory of the soul, then you might want to rethink it a bit, for it's a great conceptual tool which helps us understand our identity. You might try to save this belief, as did famous philosophers like Aristotle or Richard Swinburne, by saying that the soul exists, yes, but it dies whenever the body dies. We really have no reason to believe otherwise. This could reduce some mysticism around the soul and make the simple view possible for some atheists who don't want to believe in an afterlife but really want the stability of the simple view. The problem for us is that if we do this, we still have many problems about the soul. We still can't measure it in any way, and as such, we don't know what rules it follows. There might be something outside of physics which makes up the soul, and as such, identity too. But if it is, then how could we possibly know what it is? These are questions a bit too advanced for modern science. If quantum physics ever proves the existence of the soul, of something in the quantum realm keeping our identity together, then yeah, totally, I can believe that the soul exists and we can see how it relates to other things. But as of now, we shall have to make do with whatever we have at our disposal. And with just our minds and with what modern science gives us, we still can find a very big issue with the soul. If it is unchanging, then what purpose does our lived experience serve? Why do we live through so many beautiful moments or through so many traumatic experiences if our soul is forever the same? It would be very hard for a lot of people to believe and to truly believe that life is just absurd like that we're just forced to entertain our souls, as if we were a TV show and they the viewer. Besides that, we could clearly experience life-changing events. The death of a relative or the birth of a child can be massive turning points in our lives. Even things like buying a car or reading a great book, these can change you in significant ways which you can clearly see. But on the other hand, if we admit that the soul can be changed by our actions, then how does identity stay the same throughout our lives? Does the soul change, but our identity doesn't? Then the soul wouldn't be correlated with identity and would be back to square one. That's why the main ontological theories about the soul don't really bother with the problem of identity. Sure, for Plotinus or for Augustine, the soul wants to be freed of this mortal shell and go back to where it came from. The one for Plotinus or God for Augustine. I know, very edgy. Although the soul is very important for them, they don't really talk about identity and what it is. They talk about identity with God, but they don't really say what identity proper is. They just kind of take it for granted. And this comes back to the idea of a simple view. That's exactly what the doctrine of the soul does. It says that we have a soul which guides our identity, but it doesn't really say how it does it. Well, this being said, the belief that the identity exists and we can know it is called the complex view. Let's see what that means. Part 3. The complex view. Okay, so the main idea of the complex view is that identity is made out of a number of attributes which can change through time and which we can know and understand. The big issue here, of course, is how can we know that it's the same person if its attributes change over time? Well, the solution is to find something on which we could base our identity through time. To do this, we could firstly think about our body. One person is the same if it has the same body. That's really straightforward. Whenever we look in a mirror, we recognize ourselves based on our body and our facial features. And it's the same story with other people recognizing us. So we could say that, yeah, okay, the body is where identity hides. But with this approach, we quickly run into some trouble. Bodies change, and sometimes they do it drastically. Therefore, someone who goes to puberty, has plastic surgeries, or was badly burned in an accident could not be considered the same individual as before. And that's plain out stupid. While we don't all go through plastic surgery or suffer third-degree burns, we all go to puberty. And we can confidently say that it's still us at the end of it. Besides that, it would be very hard to accept that your body is everything that defines you. It doesn't seem as if it has much control over your thoughts. If you lose an arm or a leg, the things you identify with are the same as before. You can't be an engineer without a leg, or a painter without an ear. And besides that, it's really weird to identify yourself with your body. And it's really bad when other people do it. Okay then, if it's not the body, then what is it? Well, of course, we could say that our identity is correlated with our brains. It seems like the brain has all the memories and traits that make us, well, us. It also seems like the brain can't be altered to the point where it no longer resembles itself. You don't do plastic surgery on a brain. As such, it would be easy to believe that the brain is the anchor of identity. Too bad that this hypothesis also has its issues. To illustrate them, we shall make use of something very much beloved by contemporary Anglosphere philosophers: thought experiments. What if we split the brain into two hemispheres? Science shows that a person which gets their brain split into two hemispheres gets two cerebral fluxes, and as such, we could say that he's two people now. But better yet, what if each hemisphere gets transferred into another body? One which doesn't already have the brain inside. Could we then say that it's the same person in two different bodies? Well, if identity is to be found in the brain, then yes, of course we can say that. But would anyone ever say that? Not really. Yet again, our sense of identity tells us that no, it isn't the same guy. If we agree that only one of these people is the continuation of the first person, then only one hemisphere gets the identity. And this gives rise to the impossibility of selecting which hemisphere is the actual continuation of the person. Which of the two hemispheres gets identity going? We can't know. Until such an experiment will be done, the hypothesis with the brain is unsatisfactory. And I don't think such an experiment will be done soon because it's not very ethical. Well, if it's not the brain, we could try a standard which is not really physical, but we can also prove that it exists. And yes, it's memory. So, does our memory keep our identity through time? It sure seems like it. This is what gives us the development of our personality after all. We know who we are because we can remember who we are. Even in case of a body swap, like the one in this experiment, you can still say that you have a continuation of the person. You can say that it's the same guy until he gets new memories, which to be fair is almost instantly. But then we just have two people which are very, very similar in brain content. And I don't really see a problem with this. So, memory seems to work. But it really doesn't if you think about it. It actually has more problems than the brain or the body. First of all, we can lose our memory. In fact, we do it all the time. You don't remember everything that you do. That's why you still have to learn for an exam even though you already heard the information once. If I ask you what you ate last Wednesday, there's a big chance that you won't know. And having fewer memories than lived experience isn't the only problem, for we can have more memory than lived experience too. Hallucinations exist. Memory often plays tricks on us. It's not rare to find that we think we know something which isn't really real or which hasn't happened. And besides all of that, could we say that from memory comes morality? What about our temper or our feelings? Do they come from memory? Well, not really. Not since Freud's discovery of the unconscious. But those things still makes us what we are. And the memory hypothesis would just exclude them from our identity. Okay, so then it's not memory. But we are getting closer. What about some sort of psychological continuity? What if it isn't just memory, but the whole psychological apparatus? And this we actually see in media all the time. For an example, we can look at Klaus from American Dad. He was a renowned German skier, like a guy that slides down mountains wearing sticks instead of shoes. At some point in his life, he gets his brain, together with all his memories and feelings and everything, transplanted into the body of a goldfish. But he is still Klaus. You can't say there isn't a continuity between them. Of course, things are different when you're a fish, but a sense of psychological continuity, and therefore a sense of identity, still persists. Okay, so this would have been it. It would be unbeatable only if philosophers weren't a bunch of tryhards. As such, Bernard Williams created a thought experiment, which is very complicated, very conceptual, and very hard to understand. But once you do it, it truly rejects this criterion of psychological continuity. Imagine a mad scientist kidnapping you, tying you up, and telling you that he's gonna torture you. Sucks, I know. But here comes the catch. He says that before he tortures you, he's gonna give you a potion. This potion will magically change all of your mental attributes with those of another person. So now you could say that there's another person inside your body, and therefore you shouldn't be afraid of the torture. The one getting tortured isn't you anymore. It's another person, but in your body. But can you say that you're not afraid? This is a very hard question to answer. This answer, for me at least, would be yes. I am still afraid of the torture. And I'm not afraid that the potion won't work. Even if I'd see this exact same thing played out on another person before me, and see that it works, I would still be afraid. And this gets to show that psychological continuity isn't everything. Even if you rationally know that the person getting tortured is someone else, you are still afraid of it. Okay, so then we must admit that even if the body doesn't give us our identity, it has a part to play in it, or else we wouldn't have been afraid of the torture. Okay, so now it's kind of simple. We just combine the body with the psychological continuity. And this must be it. Let's call this the integrated criteria of personal identity and formulate it formally as such. Any separation of the body from the psychological traits which reside in the brain leads to a loss of personal identity. Okay, so that's it. This combines everything. It should be fine. We've accounted for everything. This is identity. We finally have it. Or do we? Can we think of any way to disprove this hypothesis? Any crazy thought experiment, perhaps? Well, sadly, yes. And it's more simple than you would believe. It's teleportation. Let's say, for example, that you're in Bucharest, Romania, and want to travel to Düsseldorf, Germany. What if we, as humanity, build a device which you can enter in Bucharest, where it copies all of your data, so everything which makes you up, and sends it to an analogous device in Düsseldorf, where it builds you up from that data, while the one in Bucharest permanently erases you? Well, if we analyze this by the integrated criteria of personal identity, then we can clearly say that the person in Düsseldorf isn't you anymore. Your body gets completely split from your mental facilities. But I think we can all agree the person in Düsseldorf is you. And yeah, that's it for the integrated criteria of personal identity. It failed us just as easily as the other criteria have. As such, we have failed. We have tried everything which could hold our identity together, and yet we haven't found what actually does it. So what do we do now? Do we just scrap it all and go back to the simple view, where identity exists but we cannot know it? Or do we get rid of the idea of a continuous identity altogether? Well, we could do that. We've got nothing to lose anymore after all. Part 4. Fox table identity. Okay, so we cannot scrap the concept of identity as a whole. It is crucial for movement and plurality and for everything we have discussed in this video. But why would we need our identity to be linked to a continuity of features? When we think about ourselves, we don't necessarily see a continuity. If you try to think about yourself and what defines you, you will find lots of things which didn't define you before. Perhaps you are religious now and were at some point an atheist. Or maybe you are now a truck driver when at some point you are a social media manager. Maybe you are a father now, which of course wasn't always the case. The point is that you change. And perhaps identity shouldn't be the same throughout our entire lives. Maybe that's just an idea which stuck with us from older times. To quote from the book, in my own translation, Derek Parfit says that in our world, which knows a lot about the brain, we should no longer believe in a unitary and indivisible I, because that does not actually exist. What makes me up as a person is more like a bunch of experiences and features tied together through causal relations and which partially overlap like the individual straws in a sheaf of straw. Some are longer, others shorter, but the sheaf is just the sum of all the straws tied together with a ribbon. In case of people, we can say that the ribbon is that self-consciousness that we all have. Therefore, our identity is given only by our personal history, by the way in which our properties combine together, developing an ability called self-consciousness, which links all our traits to time. It seems that this would be like a theory of the soul, but we replace the soul with this self-consciousness. Parfit, after going through the same mental process which we undertook today, realized that some form of soul must be integrated in any theory of identity. For we have seen that there always is this self-consciousness which binds us to our identity. Whatever we do and however we turn the problem around, we just can't get rid of this mystical connection. But what we can do is minimize it. How is self-consciousness different from the soul, you may ask? Well, it allows change to exist. In theories of the soul, it's really hard to avoid determinism, for the soul is something fixed, which is very hard to change. It has these major flaws which we already discussed, and which a self-consciousness can remove. If we accept that our identity is ontologically stable, but otherwise it is fluid, then we should not worry for stupid things, like the fact that we die when teleporting. In fact, we die every second. Every time you learn something new or you have a new experience, there's a new you out there. And yes, it's the same you being held together by your self-consciousness, but at the same time, it's a new version of yourself. As such, we have fixed this major problem. As such, you can be held accountable and evolve. You can have debts, but you can also learn new things. You can commit a crime, then better yourself in the same life, because you're always changing. This is though still a bit unsatisfying. It's only half an answer still. Yes, okay, it gives us more freedom, that's true, and is the best answer we have, but we really are kind of bad to the start. We have affirmed that we have an identity at one fixed point in time, but we don't have a formula to calculate identity throughout time. We have learned a lot about identity, yes, that's true, but we still don't know how it stays alive through time. Well, I think we're almost done. Part 5. Epilogue. In the book's epilogue, the author proposes a kind of applied identity, which is made of both physical and moral attributes, and you can switch between them depending on the situation. For example, if you lose your memory, you're still the same you because you still have your body. And if you teleport somewhere, that's still you because you still have the same psychological traits. It's similar to the integrated criteria of personal identity, but instead of body and mind, it's body or mind. And yes, I tend to agree with this position. Identity is something which is very hard to pin down. It's something you feel and can't really understand rationally all that well. If you try to do that, as I did in writing this video, you inevitably get to a sort of being, a thing which ties our identity together to time and which we cannot really understand. It's an immaterial presence which you can only feel and which no one can take away from you. The bad thing about studying identity really is that you cannot measure it. You are forced to accept that it exists and that you can only feel if a change of identity is right or wrong. These are your only tools for finding a science of identity, and you can't really base a science on feels. Identity just seems to be an integral part of yourself. And if you think about it a little bit, you'll realize that yes, of course it is. Identity is indispensable. It's equivalent to thought, to being aware or conscious, if you will, about yourself and about the others around you. We are so reliant on it that we can't even imagine how someone without an identity would function. The fact that in the movies, people with amnesia ask the cliché, "Where am I?" implies that there exists an I. Even they realize that they are, that this I truly exists. Identity just seems to be a concept with which we intrinsically all agree. We can easily say that animals have an identity too. Your dog responds to his name. He knows that there's a sound which means his own person. Animals know who their kids are because they have a sense of identity. Therefore, identity is not unique to humans and is much older than us. I would argue that identity is one of those concepts to which we all assign a worth. It's like money. We all know that it has no use value, yet we still assign an exchange value to it. And it's the same with identity. We know that identity doesn't really empirically exist. We don't have an identity organ. But with it being so important, you could say that it's something as ingrained in life as reproduction itself. Even bacteria might have an identity. It's like space and time are for Kant. They just exist inside of us to assure that we can understand the world around us. That's why in his categories, there's one for quantity, with unity, plurality, and totality. We just need identity in order to understand the world around us. And that's really it. The resolution to which we got is that we really don't know very much about this. Perhaps science might give us very important information which philosophers could use in order to better understand identity. If scientists could answer to questions like, how do animals understand identity? Is there a being without identity? How do bees or ants, basically hive mind societies, understand identity? The answers to these questions would help us a lot in furthering our understanding of identity. But until more stuff is discovered, don't forget to like and subscribe. Perhaps send this video to a friend of yours which has philosophical inclinations. But until the next one, have a great day.